approach is not in a theoretical way, but by showing you a practical example of the application of the design thinking approach. This is a real-life example which stems from the Stanford Design School. This is the school in which the design thinking approach was invented and distributed. And in the Stanford Design School, 4 students got one task. As you can see here, the challenge or the problem is the infant mortality rate. The good news are in all 3 kinds of countries. Low-income countries, marked by the red graph, the middle-income countries, marked by the yellow graph, and the high-income countries, which is shown in the green graph. The infant mortality rate decreased between 1950 and 2020 significantly. That are the good news. But the bad news are in low-income countries, the infant mortality rate is still that 50 infant deaths out of 1,000 live births, which are mostly due to insufficient medical support, especially in rural areas in low-income countries. One of the reasons for the infant mortality rate are premature babies. And in high-income countries, what is done in order to prevent the death of premature babies is to put them in an incubator. An incubator usually has average costs of $20,000 US. It needs electricity and is quite sensitive towards environmental emissions like dust and so on. And these kind of incubators are firstly too expensive, and secondly too complicated to be implemented in rural areas of low-income countries. There's no electricity usually. The dust conditions are not very good, so that they can't use these incubators in rural areas of low-income countries. So the 4 students in the Stanford Design School, they got the task to develop a solution for the prevention of the death of premature babies in low-income countries. And I show you what the outcome was.
Forward TV. The world is thinking.
Okay, I have a project to show you. For those of you who can see this, and Rachel, you already know what it is. You can't, if you're here, you can't say anything. Who would like to venture a guess at what this is? A bag? A rain poncho? A dog? Yep. I've heard a thermos. What was that? I didn't hear that. A diaper. That's for diaper changing pad. Oh, that makes more sense. What many people don't realize is that it is an incubator for premature babies who are born in places like Nepal. It was a student project in our extreme affordability class. In our extreme affordability class, they were working with a partner in Nepal, And that extreme affordability class focuses on challenges in the developing world. And this partner challenged them and gave them a very specific problem, and that is we need a lower cost incubator. Now, the way our students went about this project is they went first to Nepal and spent time with the families and the doctors who were experiencing this challenge to gain empathy for what they were going through. And by being there, they learned something very important. And that is, in the empathy phase, something that they couldn't necessarily see when they were thinking the project through at home. And that is the babies who were born prematurely were not born near the cities where all the incubators were. They were born in the rural areas. And then when they got that insight, they realized that they didn't need to design a less expensive incubator. They just needed to find a way to keep babies warm. And that small reframe of the problem statement opened up a wide range of alternatives that they had otherwise not seen. And the best solution was this little sleeping bag that had a pouch for a phase change material that you could throw in a boiling pot of water to raise its temperature. And then instead of the temperature dropping like this, like most materials, it would hold the temperature for a long period of time before dropping off, exactly what the baby needs. These students have since launched a company called Embrace and have already offering a $25 alternative instead of a $20,000 incubator to the 20 million babies who are born prematurely in conditions like this. Yeah.
Okay, so the question is, what did the 4 students do? And in order to answer this question, I will show you this design thinking approach. The first step is, as you could see in the video, to define the problem. And defining the problem you have to solve is crucial, because this is where the problem space is defined. That means how you frame the problem, either to say I need a lower cost incubator, or if you define the problem as we need a solution in order to keep babies warm, is a major difference, which opens up some solutions and which and other solutions come not into your mind. And therefore, the first recommendation is take time also when you think about mobility solutions, how to define the problem. The second step is then a phase which deals with understanding the stakeholders. In order to do this phase, you have to firstly to identify who are the stakeholders. In this example, was families and doctors and friends of the families with the babies. In mobility solutions, it's a bit more complicated to identify who are the stakeholders. Often customers are not the same like users. And in the design thinking approach, they usually employ qualitative methods in order to understand the stakeholders. So they spend time, they do a kind of direct observation, accompanied by interviews, things like that. If you have understood the situation of the stakeholders, gained empathy for the situation, then it's time for step number 3, ideate solutions. Here the intention is to brainstorm as many solutions as possible and then to evaluate them. Which are the most marketable and feasible solutions, which then go in the stage number 4, the prototyping phase. So the most marketable and feasible solution, you should not spend too much time in documenting that. So to create a product specification, but to build something you could show to the users again. And this is step number 5, test solutions. So the prototype should be discussed with the users or the customers or the stakeholders. And based on the test results, you can then again redefine the problem or do another phase for better understanding the stakeholders or ideating the solution, which means this process is just one iteration and it goes in several iterations till you have created a validated prototype which is really marketable. What we will do in our course is to go through one iteration, till the test phase. And this is also what you have then, what you have to document then in your seminar paper. A bit of background information: the design thinking approach comes from the field of product design. This is important. And product design has one focus: to address user needs. Therefore, it was developed at the Stanford Design School by David Kelly. He has also launched a company called IDEO, which markets this design thinking approach. And since about 10-12 years, it's spreading in very different areas in the world. It's used in companies for developing products. It's used in NGOs for developing solutions. So it's a very common approach at the moment, and it's also very often labeled as being an agile approach because it goes in short iterations. It rapidly, the intention is to create a prototype very rapidly and to validate this prototype together with the users. And these are common characteristics of agile approaches to product development. The main intention is of the design thinking approach, at least from my point of view, to validate the desirability, or as I call it, the marketability. This is the main focus of this approach. It also wants to test the feasibility, that it's implementable, the solution, and also the viability, that you can build a business on that. But from my perspective, the last two aspects are not focused very much in this approach. The main focus is on desirability or marketability of solutions. And the requirements which for this design thinking approach are usually that you build up mixed teams with different backgrounds. This is exactly what we have in our class at the moment. But you will work in groups, in small groups of 2 or 3 students. But the message is to leverage the different perspective, the different disciplinary backgrounds you have in order to understand the stakeholders, in order to ideate the solutions. Second requirements are flexible spaces, so we don't have them really, but the basic idea is that you have that you collocate the whole group in one space where you can separate in different subgroups in order to ideate, prototype several solutions. And the third requirement is that the process goes in iterations, several iterations, so you can't really plan when it's finished. It's finished when you have a validated prototype which has proven to be marketable. And what we will do, as I already mentioned it, we will do one iteration. So, and in order that you get a grip on the design thinking approach, I'd like you to do one exercise. This is also a real life exercise from logistics, because DHL is thinking about how parcels could be delivered when a scenario is realized where cars are banned from inner cities, and the vans they usually use in order to deliver parcels are not allowed to enter the inner cities anymore. So this is the problem statement. How can you deliver parcels when vans are not allowed to enter the inner cities? DHL also employed for this a design thinking approach, and I'd like you to go very briefly through the 5 steps so that you try to frame or define the problem. How exactly would you define the problem which has to be solved in order to solve this? Then what are the stakeholders you would like to research, and what methods would you use in order to research the stakeholders? That's step number 2. Step number 3 is what solutions come to your mind in order to solve the problem. Step number 4 is what of the possible solutions would you pick and prototype? So how would a prototype look like? And step number 5 is by what methods would you test your prototype? So go through the single steps, 5 steps, with one intention, one purpose, that you get a grip on one iteration of the design thinking approach. Your task for the seminal paper would then be to design and test a marketable mobility solution for a topic or a problem statement you have chosen and you have defined from a user perspective, so that your mobility solution addresses user needs. And I will guide you through the 5 steps of the design thinking approach in theory, and also by using a real life example. And a good idea would be that you follow the methods in the single steps of the design thinking approach, and that you instantly try to implement them for your problem statement, for your seminal paper. The case study I will use in order to show you the single steps of the design thinking approach is the traffic situation in Stuttgart. Stuttgart is famous for being one of the worst traffic situations in Germany. So it's on a hit list among the top 5 cities with the worst traffic situation. And this has quite a couple of consequences. So the traffic situation is caused by the rise of passenger vehicles between 1970 and 2017. But what you can see here on this graph with the passenger vehicles, that are only the vehicles which are registered in Stuttgart. So the commuters entering and leaving the city every day are not counted here. Yeah. The development of individualized motorized traffic has come to a steady state, but it's still very high. Yeah? And in addition, you have to account also for the commuters coming from outside. And this leads, first of all, to emission problems. They have a greater deal with particulate matter in Stuttgart. But there are also other kinds of greenhouse gases where the thresholds are very often heard, so that they get from the EU Commission repeatedly the task to reduce the emission rate. And therefore, Stuttgart is at the moment working on solutions in order to reduce the emission rates due to the traffic situation. Secondly, Stuttgart is among the cities in Germany with the highest congestion level, so together with Düsseldorf and Munich, which means that per day everybody who is using a car loses on average about half an hour in congestion, which sums up to 132 hours per year, mostly during the usual morning and evening peaks, but the congestion rate is not going down at the moment. So it's on a steady state, and the task is to ease the situation with the congestions. And another issue in Stuttgart is finding a parking space. Here you could see the average times in different cities in Germany, how long it takes to find a parking space on street, so near the road, about 8 minutes in Stuttgart. Off street in a parking house, about 5 minutes on average. That means if you have a journey of 10 minutes, another 8 to 10 minutes usually you take for finding a parking space. Yeah. And this situation also is not improving, and therefore this is another topic, another consequence of the traffic situation in Stuttgart. I will use this example to show you the design thinking approach. The key messages of the question, how can mobility solutions be developed, are one model. There are different models in place, but one model I will use is the design thinking approach of the Stanford Design School and IDEO, David Kelly. The intention of the model is mainly to develop marketable or desirable solutions which addresses the needs of the users or the customers. So it's a human-centered point of view. The design thinking approach follows 5 basic steps, which are carried out in iterations. And the 5 steps are, first of all, define the problem so that it opens up a wide space of possible solutions. Then identify and research the stakeholders, what their perspective on the problems is, so that you really gain empathy for their situation. Third, ideate as many solutions as possible. And fourth, select one desirable, feasible, viable solution and build a prototype which you show in the 5th stage to the users or the customers in order to validate them, to test them, and to start another iteration of the process. Thank you very much.